See if we can stay away from the speaker far enough. All right, so pretty impressive, huh, guys? I mean, did some of you read that before you came tonight, so you got your questions ready and things like that? But I think we want to start. Let's go back to the beginning.
Well, let's start at the beginning, because my family moved from Hamburg back to Stuttgart in 1949, and in December of 49 I enrolled in a private school in Stuttgart, and by the time 1950 came around, I was only maybe 3 kilometers away from the school, and I passed by the Porsche Villa every morning, and well, I met Peter. We became very fast good friends. I picked him up every morning to walk to school together. On one of those mornings, unfortunately, in January of 51, all 5 of us, Hutzigat, Wolfgang and Peter and myself, walked to school, and nobody spoke a word. And I finally asked Peter, "What's going on? Why don't you talk?" And he said, "Well, our Opa passed away yesterday." And that was the end of one of the greatest mechanical engineers of the 20th century. Then the family invited me quite frequently to their beautiful estate in Austria, and they treated me almost like a 5th son. So I said to myself, the only way I can show my gratitude is if I go to work for them. So in 57, I started in the parts department to deliver parts up to the assembly line to assemble 356s, A models, and then started my apprenticeship in April of 58, and finished in 61 in the fall. And since that was finished, and I finished with pretty good grades, they asked me, well, where would you like to work? Of course, a young man in his early 20s, where else would you go but racing? And so they put me into the racing engine research and development, which was, except for the wages I made, one of the best jobs ever. You work close with the engineers. You may, some of your old timers maybe remember the name Hans Metzger, who I worked very close with. And it was so interesting. All you got back then is a big, huge blueprint, hung it over your workbench. You got maybe 8 or 10 boxes of parts, and you assembled a brand spanking new flat 8-cylinder engine, the 771. And the interesting part was always, so I asked Hans, what do you think, how much we get out of it? At that time it was a 2-liter engine, which we built for hill climb racing only, and then that was enlarged to 2.2 liters for long distance racing. And he said, well, the 2 liters should develop about 235 horsepower. And so the engine was finished. I took it out on the dyno, broke it in for 3 hours, and then came the dyno test, 232 horsepower. It gives you goosebumps. And but then I want to tell another nice little anecdote about race car drivers. One weekend we went to the Nürburgring and tested one of the cars. Of course, the 8-cylinder engine at that time was still all carbureted with 4 double-barrel Weber carburetors. And Herbert Linge was one of the drivers. And they all went to lunch. I said, Eckhart, wait, maybe you should go one step down in the main jet. It just doesn't feel right. And they all went to lunch. And I realized that I forgot my big box of jets at the factory. So I just ate my little lunch someplace else. And they came back, and Herbert Linge got into the car, made a loop. And I asked him, how is it now, Herbert? That's a different comment. Anyhow, so in '66, as it was mentioned, I met Peter. He was invited by Porsche KG to race one of the 906s, and I was assigned to that car. Unfortunately, after 23 and a half hours, the connecting rod broke. So that was over. At that time, Peter asked me, would you ever be interested to come to the United States? And I said, it's funny that you mentioned that. I had the idea, but I committed myself already to a workshop in Baltimore, Maryland. But if that falls through, you'll be the first one I call. Okay. So it took me 11 months to get an immigration visa through the American consulate in Munich. It was much more difficult. You had to come up with a sponsor to sponsor you into the country. It's not like today. And then I went to Baltimore. It didn't work out, so I called Peter, and yes, he paid for the move to come to Jacksonville, and I went racing with him, built his 911S for the 68 911 Daytona 24 hours. He finished first in class and 9th overall. And then we went to Sebring. That didn't go so good because he flipped the 911 end over end in the S's. So that was it, but so we took the next race car, he had a Carrera 6. And he said, Eckhart, let's go Group 5 racing in Mexico City. So I loaded up the car, we went all the way through Texas, crossed the border in Laredo, and those Mexican bordermen said that must be some kind of a rich gringo with that race car. $200 and you can pass the border. Well, I had no $200, so I waited for some other teams, and then somehow they called the Presidente in Mexico City, and we crossed the border. Now, after Monterey, you go a little bit in serpentines up into the high plains desert, and it's almost like the movies. The sun was going down, I was going down a long, gradual decline, and I was by myself, no other team member. And I heard a big clunking noise, and I looked in the rearview mirror, and my drive shaft from the truck came behind me in different pieces. So that was it. So I pulled the ramps out, unloaded the Carrera 6, and had about another 1,000 miles to go to Mexico City. Now bear in mind, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I stopped at a gas station, and little Mexican kids climbed over, wanted to wash the windshield. And I filled up, and my biggest fear was finally getting to Mexico City with a totally illegal automobile on the street. Well, not that way. When I approached an intersection where police made traffic, he just waved me through. He wanted to listen to the noise of the engine. So I finally made it to Mexico City and called Peter in his hotel. He was there with his wife Jennifer. And let's go to the track, he said. I said, Peter, not so fast. I have a toolbox and a race car, and that's it. So I told him what happened. He took care of it. There's also a Mexican AAA that picked up the truck. So we went to the track, and would you believe it, in the second lap, he stuffed that beautiful Carrera 6 into the catch fence. So that was over. We sold it to a Mexican candy manufacturer, and saw it later on, years later. They modified it and put a Volkswagen Beetle body on it, on that frame of the Carrera 6. Well, we came back, and then I had the offer to start to work for Porsche Car Southeast, covering 9 states as far west as Arkansas up to Charlotte, North Carolina, and down to Key West. It was a very interesting job, and bear in mind the 911 was in its infancy, and we had unfortunately quite a bit of engine problems, especially back then with holes being burned into the piston. And I remember vividly, one day I was called to New Orleans. Dr. Lajardia, his 911S, had that problem, and I trained that technician to overhaul that 911 engine perfectly, which got hauled to new set of pistons and cylinders and was running fine, and was finished, and the doctor came by. He was so glad. He wanted to drive me back to the airport so I can fly back to Jacksonville. And I said to the doctor, why don't you let me drive it? I just want to make sure everything is okay. A long straightaway, and I punched it, and I looked in the rear mirror, and nothing but blue smoke. The same problem again. So I saw them. Fortunately, the technician back at the dealer knows now how to fix them. I don't have an answer yet, but as soon as I know, I will know. Months later, we finally found out what the problem was. It was not really Porsche's problem. It was the fact that Robert Bosch delivered distributors where the spring for the breaker points was too weak. So you had misfires, and the misfire caused the pre-ignition and therefore burned a hole in the piston. Just one little anecdote. Then in the fall of '68, Audi came into the picture, and so I was representing Porsche and Audi, and covered then only 3 states and finally only Florida. By the December of '72, I followed Pete a little bit. He bought already the 91710, but he was never very comfortable in that big brute of a car. So he asked me in December if I would be willing to go Can-Am racing with Hurley in '73, which I said yes, I would do. And it was a very interesting season, hard work. It was me, myself, and I, and one gopher once in a while. But we finished third in the standing. Our best finish was in Laguna Seca, the second to last race, where we finished third, and then finally in Riverside, second. And then came the energy crisis. And in '74, I lost my job. Couldn't find a job in Jacksonville anywhere. So one day Hurley called me and said, Eckhart, don't you know anybody at BMW Motorsport? I understand they come racing with their 3.0 CSL next year, meaning '75, and want to compete against us. And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I know Jochen Meerpasch real well. He used to race for Porsche when I was there with the factory. Why don't you give him a call and see if I can maybe get a ride with them? So I did, and Jochen said, well, unfortunately, we selected our drivers already, which I think consisted of Brian Redman, Sam Posey, the late Ronnie Peterson, and Hans Stuck. But what are you doing here? As he said, I don't have a job. Well, why? Well, that's great. Get yourself a ticket, fly to Munich, and make yourself familiar with our 3.0 CSL, and you can go racing with us, which I did. So in January, I picked up the car in New Jersey and drove it down to Hueytown, Alabama, where we made up our racing quarter in Bobby Ellison's garage. So that was a rather interesting little spiel with BMW, and I was promised once this season is over I would get a job with them, and I did the same thing as I did for Porsche Audi before for BMW as a as a district service manager, but only for Florida. That was till '78, and then family reasons forced me to get out of the road, and I got several jobs in between in Jacksonville until I signed up with Brewers again in '80, and in '82 went one more time with them to Le Mans We raced 924 GTR, which Al Horvath had one of them, and we had the other one, and we finished first in class, but that wasn't the most exciting race car. So, where are we now? Oh, yeah, and then I heard through the grapevine in '83 already, early at the Daytona 24 hours in '83, I met some of my old colleagues from the factory, and they said, do you know that Porsche is separating from Audi in '84? So I wrote all kinds of resumes to Porsche AG, and but never really got a response. So then I found out through the then Porsche Audi rep that called on rumors. I asked him, would you please put in a word for me? And they hired me. And that was the beginning of my last 22 years in the Porsche business with Porsche Cars North America. A beautiful company to work for, with lots of nice rewards and entertainment, like when we introduced the last air-cooled 911 in little north of Malaga, the 993, then the first water-cooled 911 at the Formula One racetrack in Barcelona, and then its successor, the 997 in Lisbon in Portugal, and then came the, which was very impressive, the Cayenne we introduced on the island of Sardinia, and I was driving one of them through a terrain that was, you automatically think you never get out of it, but that car crawled on all four wheels just the way it wanted and went out. It was super impressive. Well, one of my last duties to open up a new dealership was this one here in 2005, and in 2006 I retired and had a great time.
Congratulations, yeah.
So, pretty impressive. Just the history, it's amazing. So, I've known Eckhart for a long time and didn't know half of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When we first introduced the 993, we went to Daytona, and Hurley was driving, and we took all, and the whole track, the infield and the oval. But then he had a commitment in to go back to Jacksonville, and they weren't done taking pictures. So I said to them, well, Hurley and I have about the same height, and nobody knows, once I put his helmet on and this racing suit on, that he drive it. I did about 25 laps, and that's where I found out the top speed of the 993 at the start and finish line is about 172, 75 miles an hour. And I came down, and they flagged me down, and they said, well, Eckhart, just don't go that close to our $50,000 camera, which they put right on the line there. Oh, while we're at that subject, the same thing happened in at the Formula One track in Barcelona. The factory team had all blue uniforms on, and we Porsche of America guys had red uniforms on, and so we got to drive the new water-cooled 911 about 15 miles on the Formula One track, as fast as we wanted to go. I had so much fun, but I wasn't done after 15 miles. So I went into the pits, said to one of my old colleagues, come on, let me have your red suit. And I did another 15 miles.
So there was a rumor that Daytona stint you were actually running faster than Hurley. Is that true? Any other question? Ed.
So there was an article in the National magazine with Hurley in the '73 Daytona where he hit the berg, and the story was that they found another windshield.
From the customer.
So that was the
in
question.
73 at the 24-hour race. They hit a seagull in the morning hours around 4 o'clock, and the windshield was busted. So we had to take it out, didn't have a windshield, and one of the customers, we took this windshield out, put it back in, and we still finished first, overall. Yeah, that was one of, as a matter of fact, last year, I don't know if you've heard the name Daniel Davis. He has Porsche, the Groomers Museum, and he invited us celebrating the 50-year anniversary of their biggest victory. And some old Can-Am car is sitting in there, all kinds of stuff. The Can-Am car was sold after the season was over in '74. Hurley sold it, I think, for $35,000 to Wojciech Polak in California. And then Daniel Davis came in, and Bob Snodgrass ran it at the time, and they wanted to have the Boomers cars back, so they brought the Can-Am car back for $2 million.
We were there last year. All right, any other questions for Eckhart? All right, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Fantastic.